Well, it's interesting in the middle of this new world that we're living in right now with fear and uncertainty and angst and, what's going to happen, how long is this going to take, and is it going to, whatever, just a ton of questions around it. There's still reason to celebrate, right? So happy birthday, church. Today is our 22nd birthday. Yes. So 22 years ago this morning, a group of 23 adults and 17 children gathered at a theater at 59th Avenue and Bell Road to do our first public gathering as a church. And it was quite an experience. We had, as a group, cobbled together enough funds to be able to go week to week to rent this theater at $450 a weekend. We didn't know from week to week how long we'd be able to do that. And we gathered there, and we arrived, put up a rickety wooden stage over top of the chairs in front of one of the theaters, and the other theater was our kids' gathering, where they gathered in one large group, or one small group. And our little toddlers, the little guys, we had cordoned off an area in the lobby, which turned out to be interesting because parents, when they pick their kids up and go, my child's a lot dirtier than when we brought that child this morning, because they were picking all the gunge off of the carpet. Apparently, we thought that was a good idea. Yeah. We arrived to the smell of stale popcorn and sticky floors. But 23 adults and 17 kids said, we have discovered the love of Jesus. And as much as there are fantastic churches already in this community, we wonder whether Jesus might have picked us to do something in maybe our own unique way that would represent him well, so that our friends and our family and people we don't even know yet would find the love of Jesus that we have found, that they would find the transformative, gracious power of Christ in their lives like we have. And so we set out to gather and to do that, March 15th of 1998. Afraid, uncertain, a little bit of angst, kind of like the feeling in our world today in some ways. And, coincidentally, in the last 22 years, we have kept our eye on that church planting ball, because we still believe that planting new churches in new ways in new communities is the most effective way to reveal the gospel, to live it out in a way that is impactful in people's lives. So over these last 22 years, we have planted a few churches here in our city. Some have done really well, others have not. We have planted churches in Fresno, California, partnered with some people in Salt Lake City, a couple of places in Minnesota, one that's being planted right now in Romania, one on Mount Elgin in Kenya. And I don't say that because yay us. It's just what happens when conviction takes over and you really believe in the power of the local church and the gospel of Jesus to transform lives. So, second, coincidentally, one of the churches that we're helping in St. Paul, Minnesota, sent their pastor here for a week, and he's with us this morning, Andy O'Rourke, right here. Yeah, right there. Yeah. Welcome here, Andy. Andy's a pastor at Antioch Church, and I think our partnership has been around for 3 years or so, something like that. And if you get a chance, keep an appropriate 3-foot distance, but it's not because of coronavirus. You just want to stay that far away from Andy. That's really what it is. No. He'll hang around between services and get to know him and say hi to him. All right. The series that we started last week, incidentally, it's interesting how we pick series not with the context of what's happening in the world right at that time. And here we have a series that we're talking about people who are going through a really difficult time. And there's fear, and there's angst, and there's uncertainty. And who knew that we would pick this series taken from an ancient letter, almost 2,000 years ago, and it would be so applicable to what we're experiencing and living through this day. So last week we started a series looking at 1 Peter. And I'll give you a little bit of context for it. You might recall this. My friend Paul was teaching last week, and he gave a definition for resilience. And we're calling it the resilience, but this is the slight modification of what he gave us. A resilient is a person with the capacity or ability to recover quickly from difficulties. And last weekend, as Paul was teaching, there was an image that went off in my mind from when I was 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 or 18. I don't remember when exactly it was, but I was like a lot younger than what I am today. And my parents bought me this toy that absolutely captured my imagination, and I had so much fun with it. I must have been younger than high school, I hope. And I went searching on Amazon to see if I could find it, and I found the toy. And some of you might have had this particular toy. Bozo the Clown, right? Anybody familiar with Bozo the Clown? Yeah. So here's what struck me with it. As we're talking about resilience, I had so much fun because he keeps bouncing back, right? Over and over again. You can't keep him down. And that's what reminded me. Look out, right? That's what reminded me of what a resilient is. Like, this is just a plastic bag full of air, right? But it has that character that is innately this thing. It is the resilient. It's one of the resilients. And this is what Peter is trying to communicate to a group of people who are in a desperate situation, that they are not just resilient. They don't just have that quality of tenacity. They're not just people who go like, positive attitude, we're going to make it, we're going to tough it out, in the end it's going to be okay, let's go, we'll hang in there, we'll do what we can. That is resiliency, it is. But you don't have to be innately resilient to have that approach. But what Peter teaches here to some people who are in a tough spot, he says, Jesus doesn't just want you to be resilient. He's made you a resilient. That's what he's made you. Something happened in your life that didn't just take over your positive attitude and your good approach to life. No, you became a new person at some point. He uses the term born again when he talks to Nicodemus. Remember that? There's something different between being resilient and being the resilient. And this is what Peter is driving at. Now, it's interesting that Peter writes in a place where his own reality is whether he's going to be a resilient or not. Very likely, he's in a prison in the city of Rome in and around 63, 64, 65 AD, something like that. Now, he's not in prison because he's like a ne'er-do-well. He hasn't broken laws in that way. He's there because of his commitment and his love for Jesus. And that's it. That's what he's done. But you see, in Rome at that time, and we always have to think of the context of what we're studying in the scripture because that informs us. So a little context here. In Rome, to self-identify as a Jesus follower was seen as an act of treason against Caesar. Here's why. Because Caesar, the Romans believed, was God. Not just like a representative, he was God, he was divine. Rome offered salvation to people. Rome's going to save you. And your future, if it isn't birthed in what Rome can offer, there is no future. So be dependent on Rome. Well, the very essence of someone who follows Jesus is that Jesus is Lord. He's God. And that means Caesar's not. That's a problem. It means that my salvation, my rescue, is in Jesus Christ and what he's done. That means Rome's not my salvation, and I don't need Rome for that. And my future hope is squarely in a resurrected Jesus Christ. And if that's the case, then my hope is not in Rome. And Rome cannot offer me what I really need and what I have. And as a result, people who self-identified as followers of Jesus were seen treasonous to Rome. And that is what has got Peter in the spot where he's at. However, some more context here. Now, I have to say this, historians aren't clear of the exact timing of this. Whether Peter could have been around when this circumstance is happening, for sure it could have been, but not definitive, so don't go to the bank on this. But there's something else happening in Rome in and around this time that causes a group of people to flee to another part of the Roman Empire, about 1,500 miles to the north and east of there, which is modern-day Turkey. And it could just be that this is where Peter's letter to them that we're looking at comes in. So what's going on? Well, in the summer of 64 AD, a situation arose in Rome where the emperor at the time, Nero, wanted to build a legacy for himself. And so one of the ways that Roman Caesars did this was by building edifices and buildings in their name to their honor. However, the largest part of the downtown core of Rome, if you will, had already been built out, and there was no land really for Nero to do this. So he came up with this ingenious, diabolical, horrible plan, but it was his plan. He decided to burn down a portion of Rome, kind of the derelict part of the city, so he could burn it down and build edifices to himself. However, people lived there. Citizens of Rome lived in that area, and he just torched it. What he didn't anticipate is that those citizens would blame him for their new homelessness. And so now he had like a political problem on his hands. He had a bunch of people rebelling, and he did a second diabolical, somewhat clever thing. He found a fringe group of religious people and blamed them for it. And blamed them. You see, there was this sect, kind of a knockoff sect of Judaism. They called themselves Christians. And rumors had spread around Rome that you were to avoid these people because they were cannibals. What? Yeah, apparently they believed that it was normal and natural for followers of Jesus to eat his body and drink his blood. Well, they did, but that's not what it meant. It was an honor and a remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice. It was symbolic, but it wasn't taken that way. And so rumors spread that these Christians were cannibalizing. Secondly, these Christians gathered for something called love feasts. And what they were is just community gatherings to care for, look after, enjoy a meal together in community, and look after one another's cares. However, the rumor started that there was a sexual connotation to that. And that was a diabolical kind of thing. So Nero seizes the opportunity, and he blames the Christians for it, and persecution of the cruelest form breaks out in Rome against the Christians. And the Christians flee. In large part, some stayed. In large part, they flee. And where do they flee? To northern Turkey. Now, Peter's in prison in Rome, and he writes to a group of people, maybe those very people, to encourage them. But it's a fascinating thing. He doesn't write them and say, hey, hang in there. Be positive. Hold on to your faith. It's all going to be okay. You can do it. Be resilient in those times. No, that's not what he writes in his letter. Rather, he tells them that the Jesus they follow has made them into something, a different kind of people who think differently, who actually are different. They haven't just become resilient, though they are. They actually have become the resilience. So let's take a look at a section from the second chapter of Peter where Peter is addressing and directing their thinking to Jesus and what he's made them. It's really amazing. We're reading this 2,000-year-old letter, isn't it? So I'll take you to verse 9 of chapter 2. He starts off, this is going to be a little confusing, so I'm going to read it and then come back and try to explain it. He starts off verse 9. He says, but you are not like that. Well, what's the first question? Like what? You are not like what? Well, he's just spent the last 5 verses reminding them of what has happened in their lives, that there was a time in their world where they didn't have the hope of Jesus, where they didn't have confidence in him, where they were at the mercy of the whims of Caesar and whatever edicts he wanted and whatever happened within the culture. But then one day they discovered who Jesus was, and they said yes to him, and they literally became a different person. Not a modification of the old, not a behavior correction, an entirely different person thinking new because they had gone from spiritual death to spiritual life. They were suddenly alive, infused by God himself in his spirit form. And he's reminding them that that's who they become. He uses kind of a temple metaphor, architectural metaphor, but that's what he's drawing to. And then he says, but you also know that you were living next to, working alongside people who didn't believe that, who didn't embrace Jesus in that way. In fact, they pushed back violently against Jesus. You know that. Now, it's as if he's saying, you all live in the same circumstance and situation where fear is possible, where angst is possible, where uncertainty over the future is there. But look how you deal with it, as compared to people who have never been renewed in Jesus and pushed him away. And that's where he comes in. He says, and you're not like those who have pushed them away. And then he makes this profound statement about who they've become, not what they should do. They've actually become something. He says, but you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are royal priests. You are a holy nation. You are God's very own possession. Now, just hold on for a second. It's so important to understand this. He is not writing to individual people and saying, you are a royal priest. He is, but it's broader than that. He's not writing just to individual people to say, you are God's chosen possession. He is, but these are plural. He's talking to this group of people, this body of people, these resilients. He's talking to the whole group of them as if to say, you need each other. You are only the resilience as you are a group of resilience. You need one another. This is meant to be done in community, together. And so he writes these things. He says, together, you are a chosen people. Together, you are a royal priesthood. Together, you are a holy nation. And together, you are God's own possession. Can we take a minute and just look at each one of these really quickly, what he's thinking? What's he mean by a chosen people? Well, he doesn't say you are a choice people. You see, if we were a choice people or we thought we were a choice people, we could look at that and go, well, of course he chose us because we're choice. We're a little better than someone else, and there's some merit why he would choose us. Like, we worked really hard, so we got the scholarship. Really dedicated to the company, so I got the promotion, got the raise, got the bonus. No, that would be to be a choice person. We're not choice individually. We're chosen. Against all odds, we're chosen. But we are chosen. And the fact that we're chosen makes us choice. We're choice on the other side of being chosen. We're not choice on the side of being chosen. It's a profound thing. You know why? Because to be chosen is an act of free grace on God's part. He just chooses to do it. Doesn't pick the best, doesn't pick the most likely. He picks us. And then we become choice together. We are his chosen people. We're a royal priesthood. Now, this was jaw-dropping for the people in the first century to hear this, because there was this standard idea that the god or the gods were out here someplace. They were over top of everything. And then there were a group of people who were not really like God. They couldn't get to God. They couldn't connect with God. They're down here someplace. And those two, there's a gap between them, and they can never really connect with one another fully and completely. These gods often were mean-spirited and angry with these people, and these people lived distant and fearful of their God. Then a Jewish group came along and said, no, there's one God, but he was still kind of out here, and they were here, and there was a sacrificial system to try to get to him. But in all those cases, there was someone between those gods and those human beings, and they were called priests. They were people that were elite. They had something special. They had done well academically. They knew the ins and outs. They had been invited, called to whatever. They were unique from the rest of the people. And they alone could speak to the god or gods on the behalf of these people. And these people got messages from God through the priest from God. And so there's always this intermediary. And then Christians come along and go, you know something? Jesus Christ married that up. God is no longer out there. And we are no longer distant from him. But the thing that kept the distance, which was people's independence and autonomy, has been broken. I paid the price that separated, we've brought it together. And now people and God are united together through Christ. It was so jaw-dropping in that culture to say that. And then Christians, when they would gather, they would talk to God like they were talking right to him, the whole group. When they would bring sacrifices, it wasn't to pay for something so they could talk to God. They brought sacrifices of love and joy and whatever they had, because it was like a personal gift to him. And it was so different. And Peter's reminding them, you didn't get there on your own. This is something Jesus did for you. He made you new so you could have that. You are a royal priesthood. He talks about them being a holy nation, and he'll mention it a couple of times. And oftentimes we think of nation, we use terms like I'm American, or I'm from Arizona, or I'm from Peoria, or Glendale, or Surprise, whatever it would be. That's not the terminology here. It's more tribal and family kind of term. I am born into this family. I was orphaned, or didn't belong, but someone brought me in and made me a full-fledged member of this family. That's what a holy nation is. And then, to top it off, if he could, he says, you all are God's own possession. The actual term is you are God's own prized, treasured possession. God owns a lot of stuff, right? Like the Galapagos Islands are pretty cool, right? No? Yeah. Like the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the whole galaxy and the universe that we can't even see the edge of, pretty amazing. Grand Canyon, not bad. Thanks for putting that in Arizona. Right? There are all kinds of spectacular things that are beyond human imagination and consumption. Then there are the tiniest, minute miracles of what he has created, to which God looks at all of it and goes, oh, that's all fantastic. I love it. But there's one thing above everything. In fact, take everything else that I've made and put it next to this one thing, and this one thing rises above it all. And that's us. We are his prized possession. He has invited us into something that is absolutely otherworldly. And this is what he communicates to Peter. He says, Peter, this is who you are sitting in that jail. I know it doesn't look like you're like a prized possession, but you are. Your circumstances don't determine how much I value you. Peter, you're one of the royal priests. You're part of a holy family. And so, Peter, write a letter to some other people who face the angst and the fear and the uncertainty that you do, and remind them who they are. Because it's going to have an effect on their life. It's going to have a profound effect. Do you know what effect that has on us? One could think, if you want to extrapolate that out logically, it should be, oh, I get where he's going. Because of who we are, because of who Jesus has made us to be, made us new people, that means we're going to be tenacious. That means we're going to take on the world. That means we're going to overcome fear in every kind of way. That we're going to become self-confident, and we're going to become bold, and we're going to become these dynamic people in this world. That's what that's going to create in us. Might you be surprised that this is what Peter writes, and he says, as a result, you will show others the goodness of God. For he called you out of darkness. He called you into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as people. Now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy. Now you have received God's mercy. What are the implications for this? Does it make us bold? Yeah. Does it make us confident? Yeah. Does it make us persevere through difficult times? Yes. But you know what it does even more than that? It causes us to show others the goodness that we have experienced and we live in. It means that in an environment like we are in today, where others around us are fearful, apprehensive, uncertain, we are people who peacefully, calmly live outside of the fear. That doesn't mean we're not afraid. It just means that our awareness of who we are in Jesus is just greater than that. And we live in a fearful world with a calm and a peace that's just distinctively different. We don't panic. We don't rush around. We don't have to hoard. We don't have to do that. Does that mean we don't take care? No, it also means that we're wise and we're careful. Not just out of respect of the body God's given us, but out of respect for other people. I hear these comments every once in a while. It's all a sham, and people are ridiculously afraid, and I've got a neighbor, blah, 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 or a family member, this. Do you know what this would be? This would say, well, be merciful. Don't poke them in the eyes if that's what they think and you don't believe that. Be kind. Be patient. Wait on them. You don't have to correct them. It's a whole temperature. It's an atmosphere of showing the goodness of God to other people. You can show kindness to the guy who takes the last can of beans off the shelf. In fact, you can hand it to him and go, I want you to have this. See, it's a different way of seeing all of life, not just because we're resilient, but we are the resilience. In AD 249 through to AD 262, what's that, about 13 years? The Roman civilization was devastated by one of the deadliest plagues, pandemics actually, in all of history. Though the exact cause of that plague is not known for sure, some think it's smallpox. There's some leaning that way. Stories are told by historians that an average day in Rome at the height of the plague, 5,000 people lost their lives every day. One of the eyewitnesses to that, a bishop by the name of Dionysius of Alexandria, observed what was happening in his culture of the day, and he wrote about it. And he said the culture of the day was characterized by self-protection, self-preservation, and avoiding the sick at all costs. However, the Christian response was exactly the opposite. According to Dionysius, the plague served as a sort of schooling or testing for Christians. In a detailed description of how Christians responded to the plague in Alexandria, he writes how the very best of the Jesus followers honorably served the sick until they themselves caught the disease and died. This is what he writes. Most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of the danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ. And with them departed this life, serenely happy. For they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pains. What a different response. How do you do that? Well, you do it if you know who you are. If you've experienced that transformative wonder of what Jesus has done, you actually live fearlessly but wisely. And you look for ways and you find ways to engage a culture choked by fear. And you invade it with the wisdom and the power and the might of Jesus, and you look at your neighbors and you think, how could I serve? Yeah, but there's a risk, you bet. But you find ways to serve. Colleagues at work, you become the most patient employee when your boss is uncertain whether he's going to pay you or not, whether he can pay you or not. You become the most generous boss and employer who takes a risk and maybe pays beyond what you know because, well, you're just filled with mercy because the goodness of God has so impacted your life. You step into places of danger and you serve. I love it. Last night after talking with our church family that gathered last night, one of our life groups wrote Trev, I think it was, and said, hey, you know something? You can count on our life group. If there's anybody that needs us to deliver food to them, medications, whatever it is, you can count on us. We're in on that one. You see, that's just the group of people living out the goodness that they themselves have experienced, and it's a different way of living in a world choked with fear. It is. And this is who we're invited to be because of who Jesus has made us to be. We are not just resilient. Tough it out, we'll do this. Nope. We have been formed and made into the resilience. And it's Jesus that did it. And we get to impact our world, our culture, and people around us just as 2,000 years ago it happened. What an amazing privilege we have at an amazing moment in our country's history. So Jesus, you who are the ultimate resilient, who stepped right into the fray, came right into planet Earth, even knowing what you would face. Paul writes that we should be like you, who, though you were God, did not consider equality something to just grasp and hold on to, but instead humbled yourself, came into this world, died a criminal's death because that's what the world needed. And now this world needs us as your followers, those who are the resilience, to stand up and be counted for you, to look for ways to share the goodness of who you have been to us, to live with confidence, not in our resiliency, but confidence in who you have made us to be, and thereby represent you well, so that the world around would know that you are legit and you're real and you're for them, that they too can be among the resilience.